We've gotten so used to binge-watching other people's tragedies, like premium entertainment, casually stuffing our faces with popcorn. We've been sold a beautifully shot, blood-soaked, yet entirely sterilized fairy tale. Streaming giants like Netflix have turned an entire nation into a wild theme park ride. Glossy cartel dramas feed us charismatic actors in fake mustaches, the dark romance of the tropical jungle, and a steaming cup of 100% Arabica. In our collective minds, Colombia has morphed into this cozy, exotic lifestyle brand. We sit on our couches, genuinely admiring the sheer audacity of the smugglers. We listen to vibrant salsa and daydream about strolling through the narrow cobblestone streets of Cartagena. But reality has a brutal way of punishing that kind of criminal blindness. The real Colombia isn't a Hollywood script, where the bad guy gets dramatically gunned down on a rooftop, immediately followed by rolling credits and an upbeat soundtrack. The real Colombia is a gaping wound, constantly festering on the body of South America. It aches every single day, every single minute, with zero commercial breaks. The moment you turn off your TV and step off that plane in Bogota, the heavy, suffocating humidity instantly punches all that cheap tourist romanticism right out of your lungs. The air there doesn't smell like freshly roasted coffee. It reeks of exhaust fumes from millions of beat-up Chinese motorcycles, cheap street food grease, and an unbearable, sticky sense of anxiety. That anxiety soaks into absolutely everything. The illusion of safety dissolves faster than a sugar cube in a hot mug. What serves as a thrilling plot twist for a well-fed American viewer on a quiet Tuesday night is a crushing daily fight for basic survival for tens of millions of everyday Colombians. The empires of the old drug lords didn't just vanish into the history books, they just rebranded. They put on tailored business suits and permanently embedded themselves into the very bloodstream of the state. They bought the politicians, they bought the police, and they bought the exclusive right to dictate the future of an entire nation. Vast, endless territories of this country still operate completely outside the law. Out there, the government is just an empty word, a meaningless formality on a piece of paper. The only things ruling those lands are radical guerrillas, stray bullets, and an endless river of untraceable dark cash. Ordinary people are crushed between the heavy hammer of military forces and the merciless anvil of organized crime syndicates. Entire generations are born and raised in the shadow of a permanent, suffocating civil war that has been methodically devouring the country for over 60 years. People flee their home villages in absolute panic. They abandon their houses for one simple reason: to save their teenage sons from being forcibly drafted into death squads. These refugees flood into the sprawling, filthy slums of the megacities, where absolutely no one gives a damn about them. For them, Colombia is no carnival. It's no vibrant fiesta. It is an endless, visceral fear of tomorrow that drains every last drop of their strength. We drink their coffee and praise their resilience, but we remain completely blind to the horrifying price they pay to maintain this beautiful export facade. This is a country desperately trying to erase its terrifying past, but that past has a death grip on its throat, relentlessly dragging it down to the darkest depths. The fake smiles plastered across glossy tourist brochures hide a deep, impenetrable national depression. The world just keeps happily clapping for the pretty picture on the screen. The world demands new seasons, new shootouts, new villains. But for Colombians themselves, this endless, bloody TV show was never put on pause. Every single morning, they wake up with one modest desire: to simply make it to nightfall without becoming just another nameless statistic in the morning crime reports. The cartels didn't die, they brilliantly evolved. The guerrillas didn't lay down their weapons, they just retreated deeper into the dense shadows of the jungle. And the ordinary people? They continue to carry this monstrous cross. They pay with their actual lives so the rest of the world can keep enjoying the cozy myth of a beautiful coffee paradise. But today, that sweet myth is bursting at the seams. It's mercilessly ripping off the masks, exposing the terrifying, savage core of one of the most complex, beautiful, and unbelievably tortured nations on the face of the earth. The death of that infamous mustached baron on a Medellin rooftop 30 years ago gave the world a beautiful illusion that this primal evil had finally been defeated. Politicians stood at podiums and proudly declared the ultimate triumph of the law. Hordes of naive tourists rushed out to buy cheap t-shirts with a criminal's mugshot, and brass-heavy generals solemnly pinned shiny medals to their own chests. But if you just scratch off that cheap PR gloss, a truly chilling truth bleeds through. The cartels didn't vanish. They just got smarter. Back in the 90s, drug lords were the vain, stupid, and incredibly loud rock stars of the criminal underworld. They blew massive passenger jets right out of the sky. They brazenly gunned down presidential candidates at public rallies, and they built their own private prisons complete with soccer fields, solid gold bathtubs, and pet tigers. They declared open, bloody war on the government and swam in cash while the whole planet watched. It was a monstrous but highly predictable era where the enemy always had a face. Today's shadow economy in Colombia has mutated beyond recognition. It has become completely invisible, absolutely silent, and that makes it 10 times more terrifying. The street thugs with gold-plated pistols and thick chains around their necks have been replaced by men the locals only speak of in whispers. Los invisibles, the invisible ones. These are brilliant Ivy League and European business school grads. They have flawless English accents, tailored power suits, legitimate multinational corporations, and very quiet Swiss bank accounts. You could be sitting right next to one of them in Bogotá's most exclusive restaurant, sipping fine wine, and you would never in a million years guess that this polite, smiling gentleman is currently managing the shipment of thousands of tons of white powder across the dark waters of the Pacific. Modern syndicates don't fight the regular army anymore. They just buy it wholesale. Meanwhile, the sheer scale of this dirty production has smashed every historical record. The acreage of toxic crops hidden deep within jungles like Catatumbo or Putumayo is actually vastly larger now than during the absolute peak of the infamous Medellin cartel. Brilliant but entirely soulless agronomists have engineered brand new strains of the bush that now yield a fat harvest not twice, but 4 times a year. The leaves are thicker, the poison's concentration is maxed out, and the chemical labs are buried so deep under the roots of massive trees that they are physically impossible to spot, even with cutting-edge military satellites. This lethal cargo is shipped out on homemade submarines, glued together from heavy-duty fiberglass by mercenary engineers right there in the remote mangroves. Or it's methodically stuffed into legal shipments of avocados and ripe bananas, sailing straight into the megaports of Rotterdam and Antwerp. But the most terrifying mutation happened deep inside the country itself, on the gritty streets of ordinary Colombian cities. Cocaine used to be strictly for export. It was an expensive poison meant for wealthy Americans and bored Europeans. Now, the cartels have realized they can squeeze massive profits out of their own impoverished citizens. It birthed the microtráfico, an absolute epidemic of the cheapest, filthiest drugs distributed domestically. Poor neighborhoods are literally flooded with a cheap chemical garbage called bazuco, a substance that drives people insane and rots them alive in a matter of months. Street gangs now operate as local franchises, answering directly to the major syndicates. They collect a bloody tax, the so-called vacuna, from absolutely everyone. They extort money from every cab driver, every street food vendor, every barber on the block, and if a person refuses to pay up, they are simply found dead the next morning. Invisible borders have sprung up across the cities, lines that locals feel right in their spinal cords. They look like ordinary dusty streets, but they carve neighborhoods into rigid zones of criminal control. If a teenager just crosses to the wrong side of the street to buy fresh bread or visit a school friend, they can be shot on sight, no questions asked, simply for stepping on foreign turf. The government constantly pretends to fight a relentless hardline war. The army routinely burns down a couple of dummy jungle labs to send pretty progress reports back to their sponsors in Washington, D.C., and cops arrest low-level couriers. But this thick, venomous sap never stops circulating through Colombia's veins. The economy of a massive nation is soaked in blood money down to its very bedrock. From high-end real estate deals in the capital to the construction of massive, gleaming shopping malls, you can see the fingerprints of these quiet, invisible investors laundering their billions through legitimate businesses. The ghost of the dead drug lord is laughing happily from his grave, because his gruesome enterprise didn't just survive. It mutated into a flawless, cold, and utterly invincible corporate machine. And every single day, this machine methodically grinds thousands of real human lives into fine white dust. It spits shattered destinies out onto the streets, while the rest of the world continues to blindly, foolishly believe that the ultimate monster of South America was slain a long time ago. In the 21st century, it's trendy to scream at the top of our lungs about universal equality and human rights. The Western world is practically choking on its own sweet political correctness. But right here, in the very heart of South America, there is a state that legally, officially, divides its citizens into literal castes. That's not a figure of speech. It's a brutal segregation mechanism called Estratos, officially cemented into every single law by the government. Colombia is the only country on the planet where the system literally burns your social status right onto your monthly utility bill. The authorities have officially sliced up their cities into 6 rigid zones. Zones 1 and 2 are the absolute, hopeless rock bottom of society. Zone 6 is a glowing, sterile paradise for the chosen elite, and these worlds never intersect. They exist in parallel universes. They breathe different air. They drink entirely different water. People from Estrato 1 live in shacks cobbled together from scrap metal, rotting wood, and old tires, clinging to steep mountainsides. They wake up long before dawn. They rattle around in overcrowded rust bucket buses for 2 hours just to get to their jobs. And there they will scrub other people's floors, take out other people's trash, and serve the very people sitting at the absolute peak of this food chain. Their neighborhoods have no proper sewage systems. The pavement ends exactly where their dark, narrow alleyways begin. Ambulances simply don't go there. The police won't even step foot inside without heavy, armored backup. Meanwhile, the people of Estrato 6 live in massive, gated compounds. These are literal bunkers with 10-foot walls, high-voltage barbed wire, and private security armed to the teeth. They commute in private helicopters just to skip the morning traffic. They ship their kids off to elite American boarding schools. They shop in malls that look exactly like the high-end boutiques in Miami or New York. Between these two poles lies an insurmountable abyss. It's vastly deeper and wider than any ocean. A person from Estrato 6 will never, ever step down into the slums. They are utterly terrified of that dark, starving world. And a person from Estrato 1 can only enter an elite neighborhood through the servant's back door. This system was invented decades ago as a form of social welfare. The rich were supposed to pay more for power and water to subsidize the utility bills of the poorest. It sounds incredibly noble. But this genius idea rapidly mutated into the ultimate tool of total discrimination. The Estratos permanently cement a person's destiny from the exact second they are born. Your zip code dictates absolutely everything. It decides who you'll be friends with. It decides where you'll go to school. It even dictates the salary you'll be offered at a job interview. An HR manager simply glances at the home address on your resume and instantly knows your caste. If you're from a poor neighborhood, your application goes straight into the trash. You will never be given a single chance to break out of this vicious cycle. Any romantic relationship between people from different castes triggers genuine shock and loud public condemnation. If a rich kid brings home a girl from the slums, his family will do absolutely everything in their power to destroy that connection. It is a social taboo that simply cannot be broken. No brand of expensive soap can wash off this stigma. The young men and women in these impoverished blocks understand this brutal math perfectly well. They see that honest, hard work only earns you a broken back and an empty stomach. The ordinary middle class is also slowly suffocating under crushing taxes and the constant, paralyzing fear of sliding down to the very bottom. The government itself, with its own two hands, has cut off any upward mobility for a massive chunk of its population. It corralled them into ghettos and slapped a loser label right on their foreheads. And that is exactly why the cartels and street gangs never, ever struggle to find fresh recruits. Crime becomes the one and only real vehicle for social mobility in this airtight caste system. Guns and dirty cash erase all borders. They provide the ultimate illusion of power and independence. Well-fed, glossy Colombia vastly prefers to ignore these millions of invisible slaves. The elite sip fine wine in Bogotá's high-end restaurants, chatting about their upcoming trips to Europe, while literally a couple of miles away, people are dying from trivial diseases simply because they can't afford basic antibiotics. It is an invisible wall of hatred that ruthlessly slices the nation right in half. And this wall is growing taller every single day. The pressure is building inside this colossal social pressure cooker. The people from the lower Estratos are fiercely tired of being invisible. They are sick of being a cheap, disposable resource for someone else's lifelong party. They stare up at those wealthy, safe neighborhoods with a quiet, deafening rage. And when this social powder keg inevitably explodes, no amount of thick, high-voltage fencing will save the people who have spent decades hiding behind it from reality. Colombia is a country that has mastered the art of hiding its poverty behind beautiful terminology and complex bureaucratic laws. But the poverty isn't going anywhere. It is simply biding its time, waiting for the day it tears this artificial caste system down to its very foundations, violently mixing all these well-fed, sheltered worlds with dirt and ashes. Global urbanists and well-fed Western vloggers absolutely love pushing this beautiful, inspiring fairy tale. Medellin is aggressively marketed to us as the planet's ultimate poster child for urban rebirth. From the murder capital of the world to a shining beacon of innovation, from a 90s bloodbath into a safe haven for trendy digital nomads, this city is constantly showered with prestigious international awards just because the government strung some cable cars right over the roofs of the most dangerous, dismal slums. Wealthy tourists enthusiastically buy tickets for this amusement park ride. They sit in clean, transparent cabins. They slowly float over an endless sea of dilapidated brick boxes, snapping pretty pictures for their social media feeds. It's a stunning, absolutely brilliant safari right in the heart of South America. A safari where, instead of wild lions and leopards, white people are shown safe, completely sterilized poverty. Tourists are bussed into the famous Comuna 13 in organized packs. They're shown vibrant graffiti on brick walls, street hip-hop dancers, and open-air escalators. Foreigners drink the local beer, buy skull-shaped magnets, and genuinely believe that good has finally triumphed over evil. That new libraries and modern schools have permanently banished street crime. But all you have to do is take a couple of steps off that polished tourist corridor. Just turn a corner where the tour guides with their megaphones never go. That entire glossy fairy tale of miraculous salvation instantly crumbles into filthy dust. The illusion of the innovative city ends exactly where the lens of a $1,000 camera ends. Because right underneath those gleaming cable cars, deep inside the dark labyrinths of endless narrow streets, primitive, visceral terror still rules supreme. The street gangs, known here as combos, didn't vanish after the flashy reforms and loud mayoral speeches. They just retreated deep into the shadows and got a hell of a lot smarter. The state only controls the tourist routes and the subway stations. Literally 100 yards away, the power belongs entirely to young kids with guns. This entire massive city is carved up by hundreds of invisible borders. These are lethal fault lines that violently slice residential blocks into gang territories. The locals know perfectly well that crossing that invisible line means certain death. A regular mother can't even send her kid to a school one street over, because that street belongs to a rival crew. Any random outsider wandering in is nothing but a walking target. The media feeds us stories about booming economic growth and new jobs for the youth. But the real shadow economy of these neighborhoods is built entirely on total, absolute extortion. Every tiny bakery, every driver of a beat-up bus, Every exhausted woman selling fried empanadas on the corner pays a weekly tribute to the gangs. They cynically call it the vaccine. A vaccine against death. If you refuse to pay this dirty tax, they burn your business to the ground. They force your family to flee the city within 24 hours, leaving everything you own behind. People live in a state of absolute numb paralysis and constant dread. They watch Europeans carelessly glide by in cable cars right above their heads every single day. But they themselves are terrified to even step out of their houses after sunset. The local police prefer to stay completely out of this invisible hell. The authorities strike unspoken non-aggression pacts with the criminal underworld. They simply need to artificially suppress the murder rate and protect the image of their tourist capital. The dropping crime rates in the official reports aren't a real victory for the law. They are just the result of quiet collusion. The gangs simply agreed to kill quieter and bury the bodies much deeper. There are massive clandestine graveyards right on the slopes of those lush green mountains in Medellin. Hundreds of people vanish without a trace, and nobody ever looks for them. Nobody writes about those mass graves in the colorful promotional brochures for foreigners. Trendy urban planners can build 1,000 more beautiful libraries. They can install another 100 escalators on steep hillsides. But concrete and glass do not cure deep-rooted social rot. These innovations are like a very expensive Band-Aid slapped over a wildly hemorrhaging artery. The innovative miracle of Medellin is the most cynical, shameless PR stunt of the 21st century. The state simply learned how to sell its own tragedy at a premium as an exotic commodity. It hid the filthy, blood-soaked reality behind brightly colored facades and turned real slums into a highly profitable human zoo. Tourists get their emotional high, check the boxes on their bucket lists, and fly home feeling like they've done their part. They are convinced their dollars and euros somehow saved the impoverished locals. Meanwhile, those locals are left completely alone with the bullets, the endless fear, and the exact same laws of the jungle that ruled here 30 years ago. This city didn't heal at all. It just learned how to professionally apply a thick layer of makeup over its bullet-scarred face. And while the rest of the world continues to naively clap its hands and hand out crystal trophies for the best urban planning, the real masters of Medellin are quietly counting their dirty money. They are openly laughing at this incredible, breathtaking Western gullibility. The illusion of the miracle works absolutely flawlessly. It works right up until the exact moment you accidentally find yourself on the wrong side of the tourist showcase. There are no brightly lit escalators going up out there. There is only a steep, slippery, and incredibly bloody slide down to the darkest bottom. The borders of civilization end exactly where the fresh asphalt runs out. Beyond that line begins an entirely different Colombia. Politicians in the cozy, air-conditioned capital can pass hundreds of beautiful laws. They can sign historic peace treaties on live television and collect prestigious international awards for it. But all this paper democracy means absolutely nothing in the dense, humid jungle. True power in remote regions like Chocó or Arauca is measured exclusively by the caliber of an assault rifle. The state simply doesn't exist across vast swaths of Colombian territory. It is physically absent. There are no fair courts, no honest cops, no functioning hospitals. But a power vacuum is never empty. The space left by the official government was filled, a long time ago, by heavily armed guerrilla factions and ruthless cartel death squads. In 2016, the president signed a historic peace deal with the largest rebel army on the continent. The whole world clapped its hands and popped champagne, but this long-awaited peace turned out to be a very beautiful, very expensive fiction, tailor-made for the Western evening news. The old warlords laid down their guns and retired into comfortable, legal politics. Yet their highly profitable jungle roots were instantly snatched up by young, starving, and absolutely merciless new leaders. The forests devolved into a massive arena for an endless, blood-soaked battle royale over resources. Rival armed factions slaughter each other every single day. They wage war for total control over illegal gold mines, endless coca plantations, and hidden river routes for smuggling. Ordinary, dirt-poor peasants end up as permanent hostages in this armed chaos. If a simple farmer happens to live on turf controlled by one group, he automatically becomes a mortal enemy to the other. The rebels take on the role of a brutal, primitive state. They build the dirt roads through the swamps themselves. They collect mandatory taxes from every single hut and every tiny village shop. They deliver swift local justice. If someone steals a neighbor's cow or cheats a friend, a local commander with an AK-47 hands down a verdict in 5 minutes flat. And that harsh verdict often ends with a bullet to the back of the head on the outskirts of the village. Nobody will ever go complain to the police. The nearest precinct is a 3-day trek through muddy wilderness. Besides, the local cops are terrified to step outside their fortified concrete bunkers ringed with sandbags. Kids in these forgotten villages grow up with a crystal-clear understanding of one terrifying truth. The only way to survive, make money, and earn respect is to pick up a heavy firearm. Recruitment into the guerrilla squads runs non-stop, 24/7. 13-year-old boys pull on rubber boots, shoulder heavy backpacks, and disappear into the damp jungle forever. They become expendable cannon fodder in someone else's million-dollar narco war. There is no upward mobility for these kids, no bright university campuses, no career ladders. They face one brutal choice: rot in poverty on a muddy farm, or seize the real power of a man with a gun. The old leftist ideology died a long time ago, rotting away disgracefully in these tropical swamps. Rebels used to read political manifestos and talk about protecting poor peasants. Today, they are nothing more than massive, brilliantly organized crime syndicates. They are driven exclusively by an insatiable thirst for maximum profit. Tons of white powder and kilos of illegal, blood-stained gold. That is their one and only true constitution. The authorities in Bogotá occasionally deploy the regular army into the jungle on state-of-the-art attack helicopters. Soldiers storm the forest, burn down a couple of abandoned camps, and snap pretty pictures to report back to the defense ministers. Then they quickly fly back to the safety of their military bases. And the second the roar of the rotor blades finally fades into the distance, the exact same armed thugs slowly emerge from the thick bushes. Life instantly snaps back into its familiar, bloody routine. It's a monstrous game of cat and mouse, and it costs the lives of thousands of civilians every single year. People live in a state of absolute, total terror. They go to sleep having no idea who will knock on their flimsy doors in the early hours of the morning. It could be the army, the guerrillas, or cartel hitmen. Every single one of these men demands a hot meal, valuable intel, and absolute slavish obedience. The slightest mistake always costs you your life. The price of human blood in these wildlands is exactly equal to the cost of one cheap bullet. And the most horrifying part is that this eternal conflict is highly profitable for far too many powerful people sitting in high offices. Corrupt regional officials pocket massive kickbacks from the black market jungle economy. Military generals secure generous state budgets for an endless war on terror. The cartels get a massive, perfect blind spot for their dirty manufacturing. The only ones suffering are the ordinary, terrorized Colombian people. These millions of forgotten souls have become invisible ghosts in their own homeland. They are completely stripped of a voice, the right to basic safety, and any hope for a peaceful future. They try to scream for help, but their weak voices drown in the heavy roar of tropical downpours and automatic gunfire. And while the capital quietly sips its expensive craft coffee and builds new urban bike lanes, the vast green jungle continues to operate by its one flawless rule: the law of the strong. The law of the predator who shoots first and never bothers to ask his victims any questions. Geography is the most ruthless, cynical thing in the world. You can't bribe your way out of it. You can't hide from it behind a tall concrete wall. For decades, Colombia stewed in its own bloody cauldron. People naively thought things simply couldn't get any worse. But then, their neighboring country collapsed into a historic abyss with a deafening crash. 2,000 kilometers of shared border instantly turned into one giant, infinitely bleeding, festering wound. Venezuela's economy crashed to the absolute bottom, and millions of starving people who had lost all hope flooded into Colombia. It is the most massive refugee migration in the modern history of the continent. 3 million people, 3 million shattered lives. They walk across the official bridges in the border city of Cucuta. They sneak through wild jungle trails at night. The locals call these secret paths trochas. Smugglers and armed gangs have absolute control over these muddy crossings. People carry battered suitcases and young children on their backs. They walk for weeks on end. They freeze to death on icy mountain passes. They genuinely believe they are escaping pure hell, but in reality, they are just walking into a brutal, freezing purgatory. Wealthy countries usually build refugee camps and allocate billions of dollars for integration. Colombia has never had that kind of money, even for its own citizens. This sudden tidal wave of migrants simply drowned the streets of the major cities. Today, you can't drive a single mile in Bogotá or Medellin without stopping. At every red light, dozens of people rush your car. They wipe your dirty windshields, they juggle old tennis balls, or they just stand there holding cardboard signs, begging for a few pesos to buy food. Entire families sleep right on the freezing asphalt under bridges and highway overpasses. Their kids are laid to sleep on filthy pieces of cardboard, inches away from roaring heavy trucks. And this terrifying, inescapable poverty became the absolute perfect gift for local crime bosses. Cartels and street gangs are rubbing their hands together in pure joy. They just received a massive, inexhaustible supply of the cheapest, most utterly disenfranchised labor force imaginable. A Venezuelan refugee's life here is worth less than a bullet. Young men are being mass recruited into hit squads. They are forced to haul heavy backpacks of cocaine through deep jungles. Girls and women are trafficked en masse into the filthiest forms of street slavery. They are forced to sell themselves for a bowl of hot soup and a spot under a leaky roof. Nobody will ever come looking for these people if they suddenly vanish without a trace. They have no papers. They have no rights. They are just gray ghosts wandering across foreign soil. Meanwhile, the local society is slowly boiling over with deafening rage. Colombia's fragile social safety net is bursting at the seams and falling to pieces. Public hospitals are packed past capacity. Classrooms in free public schools are overflowing. Poor Colombians are barely making ends meet themselves, and now they are beginning to fiercely hate these uninvited guests. Ordinary working-class people watch as migrants agree to scrub floors and haul bricks for absolute pennies. They are driving the price of heavy labor down to historic lows. The word veneco has mutated into the most vicious, filthy slur on the streets. Brutal brawls and actual pogroms are breaking out in the slums. It is a monstrous, savage war between the very poor and the absolutely destitute. They murder each other for the right to collect dirty cardboard at the dump or to secure the best corner to beg for spare change. Politicians on high-definition screens urge citizens to show mercy and brotherly love. But these politicians never take the subway, and they never walk the streets at night. They don't look at the crime statistics skyrocketing off the charts. They don't smell that sticky stench of universal despair. Colombia made a heroic attempt to absorb someone else's catastrophe. The government handed out temporary papers and allowed the migrants to work. But this life preserver turned out to be far too heavy. The neighboring tragedy is dragging the country down to the darkest depths like a giant concrete slab. The economy is suffocating. Social tension is sparking like a live wire, and criminal syndicates are growing fat on foreign blood. It is the perfect, flawless storm, and absolutely everyone is drowning in it. Two massive Latin American nations are locked in a death grip. They are slowly sinking to the bottom of an ocean of apathy. The green lungs of the planet. That's exactly what well-fed environmentalists in expensive European suits call the rainforests at their glossy climate summits. They show off beautiful presentations, collect hundreds of millions in donations, and genuinely believe they're saving the world from global warming. But they've never stepped off their podiums and down into the real, filthy Colombian selva. If they just tried walking into that dense, humid undergrowth in Chocó or Antioquia, they would instantly choke on the horrifying, suffocating stench of industrial chemicals, rotting earth, and dead fish. The ecological catastrophe in this country isn't some abstract melting of distant glaciers. It is a highly specific, methodical, and incredibly profitable process of annihilating nature for quick, dirty cash. Just to grow a single hectare of coca, Cartels ruthlessly chop down and burn massive tracts of unique, ancient forest to ashes. But the deforestation is only the most innocent beginning of this bloody assembly line. To turn those ordinary green leaves into expensive white powder, jungle chemists use thousands of tons of the most aggressive, toxic garbage imaginable. They pour sulfuric acid, industrial ammonia, cheap gasoline, and caustic cement into plastic barrels. And absolutely nobody hauls this lethal chemical cocktail away to a treatment facility. They just blindly dump it straight into the dirt, into pristine streams and underground aquifers. The poisoned water slowly creeps through the jungle's bloodstream, killing absolutely every living thing for miles around. But even the drug trade pales in comparison to what illegal gold mining does to nature. The syndicates figured out a very simple, genius financial truth a long time ago. Dirty gold yields vastly higher profits today than cocaine, with a fraction of the risk. Heavily armed gangs drive gigantic excavators and massive dredgers, which the terrified locals call dragons, deep into the remote selva. These steel monsters literally rip the skin right off the earth. They tear up the lush riverbanks and leave behind a horrifying, dead, alien landscape of gray mud and deep craters where nothing will ever grow again. And to separate the tiny specks of precious metal from the useless dirt, these miners use liquid mercury. They pour hundreds of tons of it straight into open rivers. This heavy neurotoxin permanently poisons the water. It builds up in the algae, it taints the fish, and then that very same fish ends up on the dinner tables of ordinary people in local fishing villages. Indigenous tribes, who have lived on these lands in perfect harmony with nature for thousands of years, are now giving birth to children with severe genetic deformities en masse. Infants suffer nervous system failures. People go blind, and they slowly lose their minds from severe heavy metal poisoning. The ordinary peasants standing knee-deep in this toxic sludge have absolutely no choice. They don't have personal protective equipment, respirators, or gloves. They work with their bare hands. The mercury slowly eats into their skin, and the toxic fumes burn their lungs. They cough up blood and die by the age of 35, leaving their families in absolute, crushing poverty. The gold bars, heavily soaked in human blood and generously smeared with toxic mercury, are then easily laundered through shell companies. And ultimately, that very gold forms the foundation of the beautiful jewelry sold in the glowing display windows of New York, London, and Dubai. Not a single buyer of those expensive rings and bracelets even suspects that an entire river was destroyed and a whole village was slowly murdered just for their sparkle. The government pretends to be heroically fighting this evil. Military choppers periodically fly into the jungle and drop bombs on illegal mines. They put on a great show, blowing up a couple of rusty excavators on camera for the evening news. But the very next day, the cartels just buy dozens of brand new machines because their budgets eclipse the regular army's capabilities a long time ago. Massive chunks of the country have been turned into scorched exclusion zones, where even wild animals are terrified to tread. This is a very real, merciless war waged against the future of their own country. Colombia is selling off its unique green lungs piece by piece, trading priceless biodiversity for quick stacks of dirty dollars. Environmental defenders who try to protest this madness tend to have very short lifespans. Colombia consistently ranks #1 in the world for the highest number of murdered eco-activists. If you start asking too many questions about illegal logging or a poisoned river, two unknown guys on a motorcycle simply show up at your house and silently put a bullet in your head. The forest swallows any screams for help. And while Western politicians continue to debate carbon quotas and the transition to electric vehicles, right here in the very heart of the tropics, a quiet, systematic, and completely irreversible ecological murder is committed every single day. The planet is losing its primary defense mechanism, and Colombia is left completely alone with its poisoned rivers, bald mountains, and a terrifying emptiness that can never be filled by green bills or gold bars. In the prosperous Western world, the beauty industry sells women elegance, health, and independence. Glossy magazines preach body positivity and self-love. But right here, in the shadows of the Colombian Andes, those privileged fairy tales about self-acceptance only provoke a bitter, contemptuous smirk. In this country, beauty stopped being a matter of aesthetics or genetics a very long time ago. Beauty has mutated into the most ruthless, bloody, and unbelievably profitable industrial assembly line. It is heavy artillery meant for survival in a world where you have absolutely zero chance of success from the exact moment you are born. The era of the great cartels in the 80s didn't just leave behind mountains of corpses and rivers of dirty cash. It permanently branded a terrifying, entirely new value system right into the national consciousness. That is how Narco-Aesthetics was born. A brutal cult of the female body, custom-tailored to fit the most primitive tastes of thugs with machine guns. The drug lords never wanted natural beauty. They demanded a living, breathing, tangible trophy. Artificially massive curves became the ultimate status symbol for any crime boss. And this sick, plastic ideal instantly trickled down into the darkest streets of the poorest neighborhoods. Little girls from the first and second Estratos grow up in roofless shacks, surrounded by open sewers and chronic hunger. From early childhood, they see only one social ladder that actually works. And that ladder doesn't lead through public libraries, years of university study, or honest, hard work. It leads straight to the operating table. Becoming a so-called prepego, a high-priced, kept woman for a crime lord, isn't considered a disgrace here anymore. It's a cold, pragmatic career plan. Parents in the slums are willing to take out insane microloans with extortionate interest rates from local momsters. They do it simply to buy their 16-year-old daughter her first implants. A double D breast implant and unnaturally wide hips, that is their one and only investment portfolio. It is a golden ticket to a life with hot water, designer clothes, and a solid brick house for their aging mother. But legitimate plastic surgery comes with a massive price tag. And these starving families have never had that kind of money, and they never will. So, this savage demand instantly spawned the most monstrous supply on the medical black market. Thousands of underground clinics opened up all across the country, in dirty garages, damp basements, and cheap rented apartments. There are no real doctors with medical degrees there. Those places are run by butchers with zero medical training. They proudly call themselves aesthetic cosmetologists. They don't buy safe certified prosthetics. Instead, they inject the bodies of young Colombian women with so-called biopolymers. That pretty little word is just a cover for industrial silicone, cheap construction sealant, paraffin wax, and even ordinary cooking oil. Liters of this toxic, lethal garbage are pumped right into living human beings with absolutely no anesthesia, right on top of filthy kitchen tables. The girls endure absolute hellish agony. They genuinely believe this cheap poison is going to make them rich, and for a little while, that illusion actually holds up. They get the desired curves, they secure wealthy sugar daddies, they buy expensive cars, but then comes the inevitable, horrifying reckoning. The industrial plastic inside the human body begins to slowly but surely destroy living tissue. Biopolymers don't just stay in place, they migrate throughout the entire body. They fuse permanently to muscle, they poison the bloodstream, they trigger catastrophic autoimmune diseases. These women literally rot alive. Their skin turns pitch black, their legs break out in open, weeping wounds, and the unbearable chronic pain makes them scream through the night. Public hospitals are overflowing with thousands of these patients. Doctors are forced to amputate their limbs. Surgeons literally carve out dead chunks of human meat along with the cheap plastic just to keep them breathing. But even these bodies, permanently mutilated by surgeons, don't stop anyone. The assembly line keeps grinding away at full speed, 24 hours a day. National television broadcasts daily soap operas about the glamorous wives of drug lords. Beauty pageants in small provincial towns have been firmly controlled by local cartels for decades. The gangsters sponsor the contestants themselves, and they handpick the winners. The entire society is thoroughly soaked in this sick cult of human body consumption. This isn't just basic human vanity. It is a cold, calculated act of desperation from an entire generation. When the state completely abandons its citizens, when honest work brings nothing but grinding poverty and humiliation, the human body becomes the only premium commodity left on this ruthless market. Colombia has turned plastic surgery into a bloody game of Russian roulette. You gamble your own flesh, your youth, and your health on the faint hope of hitting the jackpot and escaping the inescapable ghetto. And in this terrifying lottery, the only ones who ever win are those invisible criminal surgeons and the well-fed narco bosses. They cynically buy up these artificial female destinies for dirty cash. They break these girls like cheap plastic toys and simply toss them to the curb the second they start getting sick and growing old. And right in their place stands a massive, endless line of fresh, starving girls. These teenagers are ready to inject construction glue straight into their veins, just so they never have to go back to their freezing, starving, and utterly hopeless shacks. And as long as this social elevator, generously greased with cheap silicone and human blood, remains the only way up, this horrifying national beauty conveyor belt will not stop for a single second. Well-fed Western tourists absolutely love telling sweet fairy tales about that amazing Latin American optimism. They buy cheap fruit from a street vendor, see his tired smile, and write long, enthusiastic posts about how true happiness doesn't need money. It is the most disgusting, hypocritical lie imaginable. The smile of a vendor on a filthy intersection in Bogotá or Cali is not a reflection of inner peace. It's a reflex. It's the muscle spasm of a beaten-down human being balancing on the razor's edge of starvation. There is a word in Colombia that is absolutely impossible to translate into any European language: el rebusque. Official dictionaries will dryly define it as the informal economy or seeking odd jobs. But in the language of the scorching asphalt, this short word means an endless, exhausting, primitive fight for basic physical survival. Almost half of this massive country wakes up every single morning staring into absolute, pitch-black uncertainty. These people don't have employment contracts, paid vacations, or sick leave. They have absolutely nothing but their own bloodied feet and a cheap wooden cart on crooked wheels. If you don't drag yourself out onto that filthy street today, your kids go to sleep with empty stomachs tonight. There is simply no state-provided safety net in nature here. A rescue system doesn't exist. You fall overboard, and nobody even bothers to throw you a life preserver. People invent work for themselves literally out of thin air, out of the dust and deafening despair. Every single day, a visceral drama unfolds on every major intersection of the metropolis. Grown men sell cheap cigarettes by the single stick because the buyers don't have enough change for a full pack. Old men rent out cell phones by the minute. They stand in the pouring tropical rain, offering passing strangers a quick call. Women fry corn arepas in boiling oil right on the shoulder of a roaring highway. They breathe in the thick, toxic soot from passing trucks and slowly murder their own lungs. This massive, invisible army of laborers works itself to absolute physical destruction. They carry the crushing weight of a completely broken economy on their skinny shoulders. Inflation methodically devours their pathetic pennies far faster than they can ever earn them. The price of basic rice and black beans skyrockets every single month, while the street vendor's income remains permanently stuck in the last decade. People borrow cash from local gangsters at monstrous interest rates. This terrifying system is called gota a gota, drop by drop. Criminal loan sharks hand out small sums with zero paperwork or background checks. But if you don't hand over your daily installment at the exact scheduled minute, men on fast motorcycles will definitely pay you a visit. They will shatter your legs with iron pipes or simply confiscate your meager cart. Your family will be left to starve to death. This is 21st century debt slavery. It is impossible to break out of. It is inherited directly from father to son. Politicians in expensive suits love to get on TV and call these poor bastards by the flashy title of entrepreneurs. They talk beautifully about the freedom of business and flexible working hours. They cynically dress up total destitution in the trendy Western buzzword, freelance. But what the hell kind of freelance is it when you're 70 years old, your heart is failing, and you're pushing a cart full of dirty cardboard up a steep hill for 14 hours a day without a single day off? That's not a flexible schedule. It is a very slow, agonizing execution by hard labor. These people built this country with their own calloused hands. They paid their taxes honestly while they had formal jobs in the factories. But the moment the next economic crisis threw them out onto the street, their homeland simply turned its back and pinched its nose in disgust. Mayors of major cities regularly order brutal, performative crackdowns. Riot police in black helmets smash fruit stands to the ground. They violently confiscate goods from weeping women and hit them with fines for illegal vending. The state refuses to give them a real job, but mercilessly punishes them for simply trying to feed their kids. This terrifying cult of survival permanently breaks the psyche of an entire nation. It murders a person's ability to dream about the future. When your planning horizon shrinks to a single bowl of hot soup for tonight, you stop thinking about tomorrow. You don't think about higher education, clean ecology, or global politics. Your entire world shrivels down to the size of one filthy intersection, where you stand with an outstretched hand or a cheap bag of candy. Foreign tourists snap beautiful pictures of these colorful street markets. They marvel at the vibrant colors of tropical fruits and the lively rhythm of local life, but they cannot smell that heavy, sticky stench of sweat, fear, and hopelessness. El Rebusque isn't charming exoticism. It is the terrifying diagnosis of a terminally ill society. It's a society where a human life has depreciated to the cost of a cheap plastic lighter. Colombians don't refuse to give up because they are unbelievably resilient optimists. They refuse to give up simply because standing right behind them is a solid, pitch-black wall of death. They simply do not have the right to be weak or tired. And this brutal, endless survival marathon continues every single goddamn day. It ruthlessly grinds millions of living people into dry, gray dust. And then the evening tropical downpour simply, indifferently, washes that dust right down the drain. The heavy roar of jet turbines always sounds like the sweetest lullaby to those lucky enough to have a return ticket to the safe first world bubble. Tourists pull down their window shades, stash their overpriced bags of craft coffee in the overhead bins, and fly back to their well-fed, predictable reality with a light heart. They take with them massive hard drives full of gorgeous tropical photos, cheap wooden souvenirs, and the absolute certainty that they've touched real, yet perfectly safe, exoticism. But the exact second the landing gear of the day's last Boeing lifts off the scorching runway in the capital, the beautiful magic instantly dissipates. The carnival is over, the bright lights go dark, and the real, merciless, absolutely ruthless Colombia steps onto the stage. The country is left completely alone with its ancient demons, rotting slowly from the inside out. Demons that no fake tourist brochure could ever possibly hide. It is the most beautiful and the most cursed place on the entire South American continent. Nature generously gifted this land absolutely everything it needs for unimaginable economic greatness. It has two massive, warm oceans, endless fertile valleys, towering green mountains, and practically the entire periodic table buried right under its soil. But human greed, the endless stupidity of politicians, and the primal savagery of the cartels have turned this Garden of Eden into a massive powder keg, sealed tight. And the fuse on this giant bomb has been burning bright for a very long time. We are witnessing an incredibly volatile social cocktail boiling over right now on the filthy streets of these cities. The total destitution of millions violently collides with the arrogant, vulgar luxury of the criminal elites. Hordes of starving refugees from next door wander the dark alleys for days, hunting for the absolute dirtiest jobs. Armed rebels in the untamed wilderness keep stamping out tons of white powder, and this poison destroys the ecology and incinerates the future of an entire nation. The government's authority exists only on television screens, while the real, everyday decisions are made by men holding cold firearms. Society is humming like a tight wire that is about to snap with a deafening crack. Public exhaustion has reached an absolute historic high. People no longer believe the lying promises of presidents. They don't trust the police. They don't even trust themselves anymore. When you live in a state of constant, visceral terror for decades, your psyche simply shatters. You stop being horrified by the morning news of yet another mass shooting in a remote, impoverished province. Human death just becomes boring background noise. Dry newspaper statistics that absolutely no one cares about anymore. But this calm is incredibly deceptive. It is the dead silence right before a colossal, catastrophic hurricane. Every new generation of Colombians sincerely hopes that they will be the lucky ones to finally break this bloody, vicious cycle. Young college kids march in the streets by the thousands. They genuinely demand justice, fair elections, and a normal, peaceful life without eternal fear. And then they slam face first into a solid wall of rubber batons and burning tear gas. So, many of them just throw their hands up, pack their bags, and leave their homeland forever. They choose life over an endless, meaningless battle against giant windmills. Colombia is slowly but surely losing its best, its brightest, and its smartest kids. It is bleeding talent to death while corrupt officials keep dividing power and greedily carving up the national budget. This massive country of paradoxes is completely deadlocked in a historic dead end. It desperately wants to break forward. It dreams of becoming a modern, successful, and safe state. But the heavy iron weights of its bloody past relentlessly drag it down to the most slippery, darkest bottom. Local cartels will never voluntarily surrender their hyper-profitable businesses without a massive civil war. The poor will never break out of their caste cages without radical upheavals. And the well-fed Western world will never stop bankrolling this chaos with the mountains of cash that rich foreigners pay for illegal drugs. The hypocrisy of global politics murders Colombia every single goddamn day. The world loudly demands that the country completely eradicate crime. Yet that very same world happily generates a colossal demand for the poison. It's an absolutely closed loop, a perfect Ouroboros, infinitely devouring its own tail. And when this giant, red-hot powder keg inevitably blows, the shockwave will flatten the entire continent. Nobody will be able to sit quietly on the sidelines. The poverty, the visceral rage, and the desperation of tens of millions of people will easily obliterate any artificial borders and any police cordons. We just keep calmly watching this slow, agonizing collapse through the safe screens of our expensive gadgets. But we forget one very simple, brutal truth. The fire of someone else's tragedy has a habit of jumping over to the neighboring dry branches very, very quickly. If you always want to see this harsh, uncomfortable, and absolutely honest truth about our world, if you are completely unafraid to look stark reality straight in the eye, then you need to do one very simple thing right now. Make sure to subscribe to our channel, smash that like button, and go watch the other videos we've filmed specifically for you. We will continue to ruthlessly rip the beautiful masks off the countries that love to hide their darkest secrets behind bright, fake tourist facades.